Hi everyone, this is Rick Pearson. I thought today it might be fun to do a very casual exploration of creating atmosphere in virtual productions created within Unity using the fog component that is commonly found within the fog and sky volume. What I've done is I've just pre-populated a very basic scene that has nothing in it other than a plane to serve as our ground and a handful of trees. So let's go ahead and start at the very beginning when working with fog. So why might you want to create fog in a scene? Well, you're probably very familiar with just about every TV show, just about every film has what they call on set atmosphere. And a lot of times what they do is they have a hazer machine that they just kind of waft in to create some sort of sense of atmosphere or density to the air. And it does lovely things for the contrast within a scene. For instance, let's look at this scene right here. We have all of our trees and we have a foreground tree here, another two foreground trees here, and then a tree or two in the background. And currently, because we have no fog in our scene, the contrast between all of these is identical. This tree is just as deep and dark and contrasty as this tree and this tree in the foreground. And if you know anything about how to direct a person's attention or to how to emphasize what is important in a scene versus something that is less important. One of the big, well, two of the big distinguishing characteristics are color and contrast. So right now, what we have in the foreground and what we have in the background are of equal color and contrast. An atmosphere or fog is a great way to have extra control in separating these two, just like depth of field is. So let's go ahead and look at our sky and fog volume. This is a default sky and fog volume. Um, the only thing that I've placed in here is that in the physically based sky, I have assigned a cube map and I've pumped up the space emission multiplier. The only effect that this has in our world is that it allows us to see a sky in the atmosphere, right? We can see the clouds and such, and we still have our visible sun. So that's all the work that I've done. So let's go ahead and look at the fog. So for the ease of our workflow, right now you can see that by default, even though the fog component is active, none of the settings are. So in order to activate fog inside of a scene, what we can do is click enable, and you might see that um, it might be worth noting that when fog is active, the component is active, but none of the settings are. You get this very default, maybe minimal kind of haze, but it only serves in the extreme background. It doesn't really affect your scene. But we want the fog to actually be here in the world that we are creating. And that's why we must activate these settings and take control over the fog. So we do this by enabling the fog, and you can notice like, oh, that actually went the other way. It deleted the fog. Well, that's because we've taken control of it. So now we need to bring it back in a way that suits our needs and tastes. Enabling it on the left is not enough. This just activates the override for the volume and says we're taking control. We must also check mark this secondary box on the right of the word enable. So by doing that, we're back to that default setting. It's way off in the distance. Now, how do we bring it forward into our world? Well, that's where the magic of fog attenuation distance comes into play. When we activate this, I'll just go back and forth. You'll notice that with the setting turned off, the fog is minimal and it's way in the background. So far away, it's almost having no effect on anything. But as soon as I activate it with a setting of 400 meters, this means that the fog is now much closer to our camera. It's still a great distance away from us, but it's closer than it was. In fact, 400 means that the nearest edge of the fog to us is now 400 meters in front of the camera lens. So 400 meters is still much further in the background than this tree. So it's not having any effect, right? If it has anything, then it's almost minimal. So what we can do is decrease this number. So I'm going to exaggerate this and go from 400 to 40. So now you can see that the fog has come in much, much closer, but it's having an effect on everything. So what if we just want to use the slider and kind of move this about and find something that maybe works for us? Now, I am seeing a slight difference, but it's nothing that's impressive or that's making me feel like, oh yes, this is the mood that I'm after. So what am I going to do? So we can change this. Let's say 20. And you might be wondering, why did our sun completely disappear? The reason why is the fog inside of Unity is very much like fog in the real world. Think of an extremely foggy day in which the fog is very close to you, and you can almost it's almost impossible to see your hand in front of your own face, right? And you can't see very far in the distance. Well, that's what the fog here in this instance is doing. It's effectively blocking out the sun. So we can have a little more control over this. We can set the base height and the maximum height for the fog. By setting the base height, we're saying that the fog will start exactly on the ground, 0. And that's because this plane happens to be at position Y0. So just keep in mind that if you have the base height set to 0, that's not ground level, that's 0 in 3D space. Okay, so let's go ahead and activate maximum height and see what happens. Oh, so this is a big change. Let's explore what's happening here. So right now, the maximum height of the fog is 50. With maximum height turned off, the fog goes all the way up into infinity, and that's why it blocks out our sun. But if we tell the fog that it can go from 0, the ground, or I should say 0 in 3D space, but it can only rise as high as 50 meters, that means wherever 50 meters is, it starts to taper off. And that means it's not as dense as if it went upwards into infinity. And this means that the fog is less dense and we can now see our sun. So if we come in here, you can see that here in our 3D space, as we back away from the trees, look how the contrast of the trees goes away, right? It diminishes. They kind of fade into the fog, and only as we get closer to them do they become more stark in contrast. So that's kind of that effect that we were talking about a moment ago in wanting to create a separation between our foreground and our background elements. You can even see it here between this tree and these two foreground trees. So if you look at this foreground tree, it's stark, it's still very dark, but there's a lighter hue or tone to this tree. So let's just A/B that back and forth. So here they're kind of on equal par. They're both fighting for the equal amount of contrast or attention. And here, this one is asking for a little more of our attention. Our eyes will come to this because it has greater contrast. So we can play around with that and just kind of maybe tweak numbers and find something that we feel pretty good about. So sliding the fog attenuation distance doesn't seem to be enough. We can create slight variations, but how do we take this effect a little bit further? What happens if we play with the fog by messing with the maximum height? You'll notice that by creating the maximum height of 5.6 meters, we've created a ground level fog, which for a lot of situations could be really great, especially if I bring that fog attenuation distance down to 1 meter, and then I lower that even further. Now look at that, and rise the camera up, we have a very low ground level mist. Not bad, and all with a tweak of a few settings within one component. Now, you're probably asking, okay, well, what about volumetric lighting? Because that is kind of the holy grail. Everyone loves volumetric lighting, and the beautiful thing about that is that it can be made from this component as well. So let's dive into that. In fact, you've probably already jumped ahead of me and have been looking at and salivating at this setting. You probably like, click the volumetric fog, click the volumetric fog. Well, I'm going to click the volumetric fog. So here we have volumetric fog, and you're like, well, I don't see any God rays. Well, remember, volumetric lighting effects can only occur within fog itself. And right now, we have our fog is very low to the ground. In fact, it's hugging the plane that we are using to simulate our ground. So if we want to see rays of light tracing around the trunks of the trees and through the branches, we need to elevate this base height back to something a little more believable. Now, I'll make this an even 10. And I'm going to take fog attenuation distance. And keep in mind, I'm just guessing at numbers, values here. So let's go with, I don't know, let's go with 10, see what happens. All right. So here we have a situation where they're still not there. And you're like, well, why? I want you to remember, just as we had to enable the fog, the base fog, and then activate it with a second checkbox, the same is true for volumetric fog. We've activated the override to enable volumetric fog, but now we have to activate it. So we've activated it, and now we need to create settings that allow us to see it. So let's play around and find something that works for us. So let's raise our fog volume just a little bit. And just to make life a little easier for me, I like to come in here and play with the base heights and the the maximum heights. So let's just see what we can create. Sometimes, let me point this out. Sometimes, in order to see the effect, what you might want to do is come into your directional light, or whichever light it is you wish to cast these rays, and you want to make sure that your volumetrics is enabled. So without it, if volumetrics is disabled, then you are not going to be able to create any kind of volumetric effect. So you want it enabled, but sometimes if the initial settings are so low, they're too subtle for you to really see a lot of what's going on. But I want you to notice that there is some volumetric fog happening. Do you see it right here where my mouse is? You might be able to see it a few other places, and you can see it from the spotlight. And we'll get into the spotlight in a moment and why I've placed it there. But you can see that as I move the scene around, you can see the very subtle effect, shadows being created within the fog. Well, initially when you're working, if you want to really make the volumetric effects much more pronounced, you can do so with the multiplier. Right now it's at 1.2. We can raise that up to something like 16. Now you can see these very pronounced. All right. So if we dive a little back in, we get in here, let's zoom in, and let's just kind of elevate through the branches just a tad. So here we can see that we have some volumetric lighting effects. So let's go back into our fog, our sky and fog volume, and find out what might make these stronger or more pronounced. So you might also be noticing the noise within the fog. So if I go to the game view, I have just a couple of cameras that are set up. You might notice that there is noise within the fog itself, right? Especially as we move into camera 2, it gets rather low quality. This volumetric fog distance effect is one of 3 steps that you can take for increasing the quality of the fog. The higher this number, right now it's 64, the higher this number, the lower the quality or the more noise you will see within your fog. So if I were to lower this to something radical like 5, you'll notice that the quality improved dramatically and the amount of rays increased, right? You can see a lot more. So let's switch back over to scene view and let's go from 5 and A/B test it back from 5 to 64, right? That's 64 and this is 5. But I don't want you to fall into the trap of thinking that that is all it takes to get rid of the noise within fog. Let's go ahead and play the cameras, and you might notice a little noise still in there. Look, that actually doesn't look that bad. However, there are situations, I've hit them myself. In fact, you might see it right in here and maybe in here. This could be one of 2 things. It could be shadows from the actual branches, or it could be some of that noise we were chatting about. if you find that increasing the volumetric fog effect to or decreasing it to a lower number to create a higher quality fog, if that is not enough to eliminate noise in your volumetrics, you might also find yourself needing to activate the noising mode. And Gaussian is not going to quite do it for you. What you're going to want to do is activate the dropdown and choose between reprojection, Gaussian, and both. Choose both. When you choose both, that takes you maybe another 15% closer to noise-free volumetric lighting effects. That looks rather nice. That looked good. I'm sold on that. So here we've just seen kind of a very brief example of how we have changed with just one component. We've gone from creating a generalized fog atmosphere or haze to a low-level ground level low-lying fog, and we have created volumetric lighting beams. So, and we can see that there's contrast between all of these. These branches here are closest to the camera and they are purest black. Then we have this, probably second strongest in contrast, with this falling back a little bit, and this is the least contrasty of them all. So that's pretty powerful. So let's look at, let's say that you're not working in a forest, you're working with artificial lights. This brings us to this artificial spotlight and why I have it in this scene. Let's say that you're working with street lamps, or you're doing like a Blade Runner kind of futuristic cyberpunk with a lot of neon or a lot of spotlights, car headlights, anything like that, and you want to really, really play that up. Remember, not only do you want to make sure that you have, let's see, so this is a spotlight. So the cone, which is, you can see this, the angle of the cone, wider or more spot. And then let's dip down to the intensity. So right now we have a lux. I'm just going to round this up to 5. I like giving the computer round numbers to calculate. I don't know if it makes a huge difference, but it's got to ease up processing a little bit. So right now we have the range, and we have the intensity at the range. So this always kind of made it seem weird for me to understand. But basically what this is saying is that the intensity of the spotlight is 5 lux, and it has the value of, I'm going to round this off to 129 at a range of 10 meters. So if I lower this down, you can see at 0.4 meters, the spotlight, no matter what happens, the light will only ever create, it will only illuminate objects that are between its origin and this 0.4 meters. It will not light up anything here, nor will it create volumetric effects. So you want to make sure that your range actually extends. So here we have, at a range of 3, we have this here, but let's say we want to see the volumetrics happening. So again, we can come to that, down to this multiplier, and we can increase this, right? So there we go. So now, no matter where we aim this light, we're going to see some sort of spotlight volumetric happening within the fog. This light is real time and it's interacting with the fog. So that you want to make sure, like if you, let's say, I think that's for some people, it's very common to, oh, my volumetric lighting effect is not strong enough. They make their fog more dense, and that's not necessary. And in fact, you may like the look and feel of your scene. You just simply want one light to have a stronger beam. That's where I really want you to always be aware of the volumetric effect and the multiplier within the light itself. So this allows you to have independent control over each light without having to change the fog for your entire scene. All right, so that's a very quick, easygoing, casual exploration of volumetric lighting and fog and atmosphere and haze within Unity for virtual production. I use these settings all the time. In fact, I'm working on a science fiction, post-apocalyptic kind of thing right now that makes use of this. And you've probably seen it in some of the other videos I've posted. I think that it's a valuable tool, and I think that a little goes a long way. So don't feel like you ever have to go with strong volumetric lighting effects. You can go with subtle, you can go with strong, you can go with anywhere in between. It's according to whatever story you're telling and what it is you desire to create. Okay. So I want to hear from you. Like, what are you working on? Are you just getting into virtual production with Unity? Are you a seasoned professional? Maybe you have input for me that will allow me to learn from you, because I not only want this channel to be a source of providing you with helpful insights, I hope to learn from you and other people in the community as well. I want to connect and I want to grow and I want to get better at everything that I am aiming to do. All right. So that's it for this video. If you liked it, if you found it helpful or made it easier to understand, give me a like, give me a subscribe if you'd like to see more of these videos as they are released. So I'm going to do them semi-regularly in between the virtual productions that I am working on, and I hope that I will see you in the next video.